Yes, Borderlands 4 does have a dedicated drop problem, or more specifically, a dedicated drop rate problem. I really love Borderlands 4, but it's incredibly frustrating to see it fall into similar pitfalls that the other games in the series have, and learn the wrong lessons from them in some instances. If you don't know what I'm talking about, most Borderlands games have had some sort of dedicated drop controversy, which I talked about heavily in my history of dedicated drops video, but to get you up to speed, here is a brief history of dedicated drops in Borderlands. Borderlands 1's dedicateds were never legendaries and were all 100% guaranteed to drop, apart from specific quest items that went back into bosses' loot pools after the quest was done, usually having a 10% drop chance. That was it besides Hybrid and Pearls, and also the Chopper, which had a 5% drop rate. Borderlands 2 stepped up considerably by having dedicated drops for almost every legendary in the game, dropping from quest and story bosses throughout the maps, and having a low dedicated drop rate of 3.3%. which, after weeks of testing and community feedback surveys, that rate was tripled in 2015, which put the rates at a solid, unwavering 10% drop rate for every dedicated drop in the game, besides special exceptions like legendaries from raid bosses. This is considered to be the gold standard for dedicated drops. Going back 1 year to 2014 in Borderlands the pre-sequel, and we have dedicated drops at launch, but now the quest bosses that drop them don't respawn and all have incredibly low drop rates, even lower than BL2's original 3.3% in some instances. The fans got mad about this, Gearbox and 2K Australia doubled down saying they wouldn't make the bosses farmable. The fans got mad about this, Gearbox and 2K Australia made the bosses farmable. And with the release of the Claptastic Voyage DLC in 2015, the dedicated drop rates were tripled just like with Borderlands 2, but pre-sequel was left in a much more barren state. Not every legendary had a drop source, which led players to feel railroaded into using the grinder, and the drop rates for a majority of the dedicated drops were 5%, which players felt was still too low compared to the new 10 for BL2. Borderlands 3 then releases with dedicated drops at launch and respawnable bosses, but there were so many legendaries in the game that there weren't enough bosses to drop them. So again, a lot of legendaries did not have a drop source at launch, which was later fixed by double dipping the loot pool for certain bosses, which made farming quite annoying, but it was seen as a necessary compromise in most players' eyes. Learning from the two previous games in the series, the game had dedicated rates at 10 and 15% for most, with some people thinking that 15 was a little too high. What was special in BL3's case though was the fact that the game had incredibly high world drop rates, meaning legendaries dropping from non-dedicated loot sources. This was heavily criticized for making legendaries feel less special, and one of the main knocks players would point to in criticizing Borderlands 3 in general. Now skipping over Wonderlands because it's kind of irrelevant to the point this video is trying to make, dedicated drops have seemingly been solved multiple times. The players have made it very clear throughout the years that we want dedicated drops for every legendary at launch, farmable bosses, and a drop rate around 10% for the majority of them, excluding special cases. Now, Borderlands 4 had dedicated drops at launch and was seemingly the first game in the series to really respect it as part of the gameplay loop. As far back as pre-sequel, we were getting told by the CEO himself that if you were a farmable boss person, you should just move on. And now in Borderlands 4, we were getting dedicated mechanics specifically to help with target farming. This of course being the Moxie Encore machine. You can pay a small sum and the boss will respawn. Once you defeat said boss, you'll be able to use a convenient teleporter to go right back to the machine and respawn the boss again, making farming a lot faster and being a huge help to console players in particular, since load times of Borderlands games were getting way longer. So the usual save quit farm strategy would have meant that the majority of players' farming time would have been spent in loading screens. So this is a really welcome change. Borderlands 4 had these machines for every farmable boss, which, like the previous games, included story and quest bosses, but now also bosses from order bunkers and auger mines to give players more of a reason to interact with these parts of the open world. And it really works in the game's favor. The loop of exploring the map for the first time and discovering a new boss fight, and by extension if you're patient enough, new legendaries, is extremely rewarding and fun. Though bosses specifically from side quests are now very few and far between. I think there's only like 5 or 6 in the whole game to make room for all the extra bosses you find through exploration. Now, like Borderlands 3 before it, there are a lot of legendaries in this game. So from launch, every single boss has 3 legendaries in their dedicated loot pool, but unlike Borderlands 3, these drops all drop separately from each other, meaning that they don't compete over each other while farming, fixing what made Borderlands 3's farming so annoying. These are all great, gigantic steps in the right direction. But sadly, the game's new dedicated drop systems do leave something to be desired. First of all, for the umpteenth time, not every legendary had a drop source at launch, with the Guardian Angel, AC May, and Fisheye being given a loot pool to drop in the latest patch, but that still leaves the Sprezzatura Heavy Ordnance and all 58 legendary enhancements. For whatever reason, legendary enhancements cannot be farmed anywhere. If you want a specific one for your build, then you'll have to pray you get lucky with a world drop, because there is no way to target farm them at all. But the worst thing thing about the dedicated drops in Borderlands 4 is the drop rates. The drop rates for dedicated drops in Borderlands 4 are all over the place, and it makes target farming a specific item an all-around annoying experience. Some drops have the seemingly normal 10, some are confirmed to be 8, some I think are 5, and some are 3%. The lowest dedicated drop odds for normal farms in the series history. You may ask, why is it like this? And that goes back to Borderlands 3 and Gearbox learning the wrong lessons from community feedback. Borderlands 3, like I mentioned, had extremely high world drop rates that devalued legendary drops as a whole. This criticism was shouted from the rooftops of every Borderlands fan, including myself, and when Borderlands 4's gameplay was revealed and they said,
"We've heard your feedback, and we've overhauled our drop rates and loot across the game. And at the top of everything are legendaries. These have always had unique effects that you won't find on any other piece of gear. But in Borderlands 3, they drop too often. This not only devalued legendaries, it made everything feel less valuable. In our new system, not only do all guns feel great, but now legendaries will truly be special events."
We thought that meant we were going back to a loot chase more reminiscent of Borderlands 2, but they weren't just talking about world drops, they were talking about all sources, including dedicated drops. This is not what the fans wanted. We wanted lower world drop rates and stable dedicated rates. Gearbox took our criticism of world drops in Borderlands 3 and ran with it. A little too far. But to Gearbox's credit, the world drop rates are pretty much perfect. Higher than BL2 and pre-sequel, but nowhere near as high as where BL3 and Wonderlands were. I think that you'd find that most people agree that world drop rates are in a great spot in Borderlands 4. We don't want them changed. Certain dedicated rates, though, need to be updated. I do not know why it's so hard to balance this. People loved Borderlands 2's 10%, a vocal minority weren't the biggest fan of BL3's 15, and almost everyone agreed that pre-sequel's 5% was way too low. So if we really need different rates for each of the 3 legendaries or boss drops, then have a 2% difference. The lowest the normal drop should go is like 8%. Some people, straight up, do not have the time to farm for over an hour to get a single roll of an item. Because that's the thing, in Borderlands 4, thanks to licensed parts, there are now more rolls you can get on your gun than ever before. Great for keeping the gun and experience unique, horrible for target farming. And this is not to say that I dislike having a part system in the game. If anything, I think it's great, but the system falls apart and becomes a problem when dedicated rates are this low. Like, for example, I've been making tons of item guides for Borderlands 4 and constantly get comments mad at me saying that I lied about the dedicated source. Guys, the Songbird does drop from Rock'n'Roller, I swear, it's just a 3% drop chance. In other words, kinda bullshit, and I don't blame people for thinking that way. The system itself is just kinda frustrating due to how inconsistent it is. Speaking of being inconsistent, you know how I said every boss has 3 dedicated drops? Well actually, some don't, some only have 2, like Gen 1 or Vile 10 and the boys, which makes it even crazier that there are legendaries in the game that don't have a drop source. There is room. Even crazier on top of that, multiple bosses have the same items in their loot pool. The Foundry Freaks drop the Chuck, Practice drops the Chuck, Practice drops the UAV, Mimicron drops the UAV. What are we even doing? Another unfortunate side effect of these drop rates comes from how class mods or comms work. As of right now, if you get a legendary comms drop, it only has a 1 in 4 chance to be for the character you're playing. Borderlands 3 fixed this by having every legendary class mod have a different dedicated source sometime after launch, but Borderlands 4 did not follow suit. In BL4, most bosses with their own maps, including Idolater Soul, Callus, Vile Lictor, and the Vault Guardians, all have legendary class mods in their loot pool, but instead of just having one particular class mod, they have one for each Vault Hunter, meaning they have the chance to drop 4 different comps. This has been a problem for almost all players who interact with farming in Borderlands 4, since you are way more likely to get a class mod drop for a character you are not playing as. The community has been saying this since almost day 1. The comps need to be weighted to drop for the character you're playing as. A, because it just makes farming them a better overall experience for the player, since no one likes getting a legendary the game doesn't let you use, and B, class mods have the most variance of any legendary item because there is a different role for getting every single combination of skill points from the select skills it buffs. This means that if you want a good one, you will have to farm for ages anyways, and that's not even mentioning passives. Now, we have received word from a dev that they are currently looking at waiting as a possible change, but it's also been stated that if they do it, it will be pretty subtle. But that's about the long and short of the issue. Drop rates, in some instances, are too low, some legendaries don't have a drop source, there is no way to target farm legendary enhancements, plus mods are much more likely to drop for a character you're not playing as, and all of this is compounded by the fact that it's incredibly hard for players to work out these drop rates in the first place. For some legendaries, like the aforementioned Sandsummer Songbird, we know for certain that its drop rate is 3% since it's been farmed for so frequently and catalogued. But this has not been the case for every drop in the game. Usually this wouldn't even be an issue since data miners could just check the code. But apparently Borderlands 4 is a much harder game to data mine, meaning that our best method of working out these drop rates is doing around 1,000 runs. And players really should not need to do either of those things just to know how likely something is to drop. So I propose a Gunnopedia. No game in the franchise would benefit more from one than Borderlands 4. Because the fact that the drop rates are so wildly inconsistent from each other means that someone who just wants to try out a new item is going to be getting more repeat drops than the thing that they're farming for, leading to frustration. If we had a Gunnopedia laying out drop rates, drop sources, and different parts and variants the legendary can drop with, it would solve the issue. You could unlock entries in the Gunnopedia by getting the drop from the dedicated source, or killing the boss a certain amount of times. This even provides more completionist stuff to the game, which Borderlands 4 thrives on. Other solutions to the problem will be to give legendaries that don't have a drop source, keep legendary dedicated drops at 10%, or if they do have to fluctuate, a 2% difference, nothing lower than 8 and certainly nothing higher than 12. Class mods should be weighted to drop more often for the class you are currently playing as, and legendary enhancements need a drop source. Since there are so many of them, the best way to break them up would be by manufacturer, then giving those manufacturer type enhancements to a specific boss. Maybe a newly added raid bosses, the Vault Guardians, or any of the bosses with holes in their loot pool like the Bio Thresher or Vile Ted. That's more of a band-aid fix sadly, but there at the moment isn't enough bosses to include them all as separate drops. And I will just say, would have been the perfect thing for if manufacturer specific takedowns returned, but alas, it wasn't meant to be. Also, just throwing this one out there, make the Moxie Encore machines fast travels. That would be a huge win for quality of life, because a lot of times farming, there is a pretty significant walk or drive you'll have to do to get to the boss. Vault Guardians and major story bosses being the worst for this, where you have to run through the entire map, repeating set pieces in some instances like the giant elevator in Fortress Indomita, which is super slow, or the jump pads in the vaults that are cool but would just be better if I didn't have to run past like a million enemies to get to my farm. And while we're on the topic of quality of life, I also think it would be good if the teleporters, instead of ending your action skill early, then putting it on cooldown, it instead gave you your action skill fully back and there was no need to wait for a cooldown or use the Dr. Z vendor to get it back. But that's all I have for you today. I really hope dedicated drops can be updated, because with these changes, Borderlands 4 will have the best targeted and dedicated farming in the series by just so far. The drop rates are the biggest issue though. If anything at all gets changed from this video, then let it be that. 3% dedicated odds are just not it. But let me know how you feel about dedicated drops in Borderlands 4. Do you think they're too low, too inconsistent, or are you happy where they are? I'm going to be in the comments of this video quite a lot, so discussion is encouraged. But thanks so much for watching the video, and I'll see you next time. My channel members are Angel B, who purchased Coco de Mer, i.e. the don't tier. Truth be told, that was just like a joke tier. No one was actually supposed to buy it, because it's like super expensive. So enjoy your nothing as advertised, I guess. Thank you so much. What the fuck? The Macadamia tier members are Jaden H, who convinced a brick wall it was in the wrong spot, so it left. I didn't know I could do that. Mayonnaise, who moonlights as a vigilante who lives in a whale. Anytime there's a crime, the boy hole shoots them out towards it. Ian Crawford, who taught a tiger how to meditate and it only cost him like 3 of his hands. Nevertheless Raven, who is the ideal person to call in a hostage negotiation since they're friends with like everybody. Ari the Dragon, who drop-kicked a fly who was just making a little too much noise. Hank Goodwin, who found Atlantis like 3 years ago but has no idea who to tell the information to. It's kind of hard to bring up, so they're just staying quiet. RJPO409, who snowboarded down an active volcano and it was pretty rad. Jetted Hydra, who trains 90 warriors in the art of poker, but never learned any of their names and kinda regrets it. Lucas Vakorka, who downed a bottle of whiskey, did a backflip, and then threw up over my carpet. Clip Troop, who promised to grow 1 tree for every time someone curses, and that's pretty fucking cool. Venmo me $1 Billy, who stole millions worth of laserdiscs because they thought they were the future, but no one really cares all that much, so it's chill. Bin Yam, who won $17 billion in a poker tourney, and they owe it all to their old teacher, but they never learnt their name. Unfortunate. Fishman6, who once Fox made me call him cute in exchange for Borderlands 1 hybrid footage. And Captain Gunlance, who has a standing invitation to everyone's house at any time. If he shows up and you don't let him in, your local government will either fine you or kick you out of the house and just give it to Gunlance. It's how it works. And my other nut tier members: JBH, Wesker 520, Chimpy Scrimpy, Medieval Rancher, Tryptophan, Koi Cadaver, Mr. TX01, Revenge Viper, Jacob Rodriguez, Whammer, Mickey 4, Miss Phoenix, Gregory Bowley, FS Big KD, Poet, Trostlass, Stabby the Hybrid, Swanky Bip, Jan Paceto, Brett with a Brain, Dominic Hoffman, Ghost is Busy, Jaw132, and Corporal Quacks. Thank you all so much to everyone who has gone out of their way to give me extra support. It really means a lot and is extremely surprising, to be honest, that anyone would even do it. I cannot thank you guys enough. If you want to join the mass of people's names I just read out, you can by hitting the join button below the video. But thank you all so much. Leaving a like or comment would be huge, and thanks again for watching. See you next time.